Now, I have the honor here on day 2 of Rosh Hashanah of delivering the sermon, and I'll tell you that I was planning originally to talk about something different from what you're going to hear. But with the news, you've probably all heard or seen by now, that Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away Friday night on Erev Rosh Hashanah, just as this new year was beginning. I decided to change course, because the one the kids call Notorious RBG is an inspirational life story in her own right. But for me, there's a personal connection, and I felt this was a sign to change the topic. 4 years ago, when Leibl and I had just started studying to become rabbis, and I was preparing my first ever sermon for our class, I drew inspiration from Ginsburg. And with this timing of her being in the news right now, this undeniable connection to Yontif, and how strongly I believe, even 4 years later, in that message, I hope you'll indulge me and allow to share this sort of sermon on a sermon, along with the newest updates, the new perspective in light of the current times that I can add to this idea. I learned and shared 4 years ago that Ginsburg has in her chamber at the Supreme Court a passage from the Torah on her wall, a passage from the Parsha of Shoftim in Deuteronomy that we just happened to be writing on that particular first week of our studies to become rabbis. The passage is Tzedek, Tzedek, Tirdof. Justice, justice shall you pursue. She has that on the wall in her chamber at the Supreme Court, which is pretty cool. As you may suspect, the rabbis and commentators for centuries have been fascinated with this short yet powerful passage. Why does it say tzedek, the word for justice, twice? Wouldn't it have been enough for our ancestors to say tzedek tirdof, justice you shall pursue? Why tzedek, tzedek? Why justice twice? We're reminded words in the Torah are no accident, and for a word to be repeated like this is rare. So what gives? As you may also guess, there have been a lot of interpretations over the years. A lot. The one that always made the most sense to me and seems to be pretty widely accepted is that it's not enough simply to pursue justice, but that justice must also be pursued justly. That the ends do not justify the means. The means must also be just. But I got to thinking about the work of pursuing justice. To be just means to do the right thing. Not only is that not easy, quite often it's very hard. Think about it. Have you ever been in a situation where you were doing what you knew was right, and yet you felt sick about it, maybe even hated yourself, because it was not going very smoothly at all? There's a reason the truth often gets called ugly and inconvenient. It's because the pursuit of justice is difficult. Doing the right thing often feels tireless, thankless, and downright frustrating. And the worst part is it's often other people, unknowingly sometimes, but still other people getting in the way, challenging you, making your life more difficult. Just ask lawyers, judges, rabbis, or anyone, anywhere fighting for any kind of cause. Any kind of cause. Working for what is just, working for what is right, is always very hard. That's part of why the verb in this phrase is tirdof. That's the pursue. Tzedek, tzedek, tirdof. Tirdof, pursue. But the connotation of this verb is actually more like to chase. In fact, it's the same verb used in the Torah to describe the Egyptians coming after the Israelites as they approach the Sea of Reeds. The pursuit of justice is a chase. And chases are thrilling, for sure, but they're nearly impossible to sustain over a long period of time. Over a long period of time, chases become exhausting. Inevitably, there becomes a moment where you fear you have to admit defeat because you just can't catch up. So what do you do? When I think of a quick repetition of words like tzedek, tzedek, it takes me to sports. That's one of my backgrounds, after all. Come on, come on. Here we go, here we go. Attaboy, attaboy. 10 years of organized baseball, and you hear those sorts of things a lot. The reason I think repetition in sports is popular is because it gives players and teammates, and even the players you're cheering for as fans, it gives them encouragement. It shows support. It builds momentum. Repeating a phrase gives it a rhythm. It turns it into a chant, into a mantra, something that can grow and build. Justice, justice. And so, 4 years ago, I came up with this idea that the reason for the repetition in tzedek, tzedek, tirdof is because it's like the Torah giving us encouragement. Justice shall you pursue. And the Torah knows, for all those times pursuing justice feels like an uphill battle, remember, just like Ruth Bader Ginsburg had on her wall to remind her, we need a little mantra, a little encouraging chant. Justice, justice. But that's not all. Repetition of words or names is a key part of our high holy days too, as we saw in today's Torah reading. If you remember, when Avraham is about to sacrifice Yitzchak, God, through an angel, calls out, Avraham, Avraham. In fact, Yaakov, Jacob, Moses, Moshe, and Samuel, Shmuel, four, along with Avraham, of the most famous characters in our Bible, each have one moment in their lives when God calls to them, repeating their names. For Jacob, it's just after he finds out Joseph is still alive, when he decides to move his whole family down to Egypt. A life and culture-changing move for our people. For Moses, it's when God calls to him out of the burning bush. And for Samuel, it's when he hears God's voice for the very first time. According to the Zohar, the principal text of Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, these moments of name repetition for all four men signifies that they were tzaddiks, righteous men. Which is fitting because there are articles out there right now calling Ruth Bader Ginsburg a tzaddik, drawing a connection to her passing on Rosh Hashanah, invoking a tradition that it's the mark of a tzaddik to die on Rosh Hashanah because even though last year they weren't marked, written or sealed in the book of life, God kept them around for the entire year because of just how righteous they are, because of just how much we needed them for the full year. What's even more Rosh Hashanah fitting, though, is that in each of the four moments for Avraham, Yaakov, Moshe, and Shmuel, each of them responds to God with Hineni. Here I am, ready, willing. A word we don't use really very often except on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. A word that connotes, as we've discussed before, our preparedness to act and to stand up for something, for a cause perhaps. The repetition of these characters' names coincides with their Hineni moments. Abraham passes his final test before God. Jacob turns his family into a nation. Moses becomes, maybe reluctantly, but still a leader. And Samuel becomes a great prophet. Repetition of their names signals transformation. So on the dawn here of the new year of 5781, with Ruth Bader Ginsburg again in the news, I am once again reminded of tzedek, tzedek, tirdof. Our traditions call that justice is paramount and should always be our goal. And I can't help but wonder, perhaps as a society, this is our moment of transformation. The moment where tzedek, tzedek for us means we're on the cusp of something big. Our collective Hineni moment. In the last few weeks, I've told a few people, I remember thinking when I was young how cool it must have been to have lived back when history was being made. Growing up in the 90s, it didn't really feel like history was being made anymore. We were reading about things from the 60s. And I thought, how amazing to have lived during those times. Now that we're living through history being made, maybe it's not all I thought it was cracked up to be. But still, Jewish tradition talks about the questions our descendants will ask us and ask of us. Our children, our grandchildren, They'll say of this pandemic, what happened? What did you do? Just like they ask us about Passover and leaving Egypt. We anticipate telling our story of how we not only survived, but thrived against all odds. Keeping to the right path is hard. Whether it's fighting against a pandemic, whether it's fighting against racial injustice or inequality, or all the other challenges that are front and center in our lives right now as this new year dawns. These fights, these causes, are feeling like chases. Tireless, thankless, always just a little bit out of reach. People are getting fatigued. They're hitting that moment where they might be ready to give up. How many other fights going on right now have people feeling discouraged and hopeless? So that's why we have to remember the Torah, and we have to remember Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And tzedek, tzedek, tirdof. For that little mantra, that little encouragement that what we're doing matters. What we're fighting for is important, and that we can't give up. Wishing you all again a Shana Tova U'Mituka. May we all be inscribed in the book of life together for another year as we fight towards these changes, these causes, these Hineni moments together.